The first book of the Kings. This is session 6. Today we start with chapter 2, and we are going to say goodbye to David. Please don't cry. We've spent so many months with David. We have learned so much about him, but today is the beginning of a new chapter in the life of the royal tribe of Judah. It's a new chapter in the genealogy of the Messiah, our King. Today, we say goodbye to David and we anoint and say hello to Solomon. Shlomo, Shalom, the one who will teach us a very deep, intimate understanding of who and what our Messiah is. More, even deeper than we learned through the life of Joshua and David and everyone that came before. We are saying hello to a young man. And David is now giving this young man his last instructions before he is passing on. And how beautiful. It's almost the same with Jacob. If you guys can remember when Jacob died, the Bible says he blessed his sons. And then he basically put up his feet onto his bed and he died. There was no illness or sickness or cancer or motor car accident or something horrible that happened. No, he was strong up to the day of his passing. Same with Moses, strong up to the day of his passing when God himself buried him in the mountains. And here we've got David. As soon as David finishes blessing and instructing Solomon, he's also going to just lie down and give up the ghost, give up the spirit, give up Yahuwah's spirit so it can go back to Yahuwah and David's body can rest in the grave in the city of David, in Jerusalem, which the entire New Testament talks about. Many, many years after David died in Jerusalem, they still said, see, David's body is still lying here. If you read the book of Acts, he's not the one that the prophecies are talking about when it's talking about the son of David, my servant David will rule and reign over my people and he will sit at my right hand until I make his enemy his footstool. No, that's talking about Messiah because King David is dead and he's still lying in the grave right here in Jerusalem. All right, so in the days of David, all right, chapter 2, verse 1. Now, the days of David drew near that he should die, and he charged Solomon his son, saying, I go the way of all the earth. Beautiful. This whole cycle, God brings us in this world as a baby, and we go out as an old person, especially if we've done what we were meant to do. Then we have fulfilled our promise and our prophecy and our destiny. We go the way of the entire earth. A tree is born, it's planted, it grows, it brings forth fruit, and, at the end of its life cycle, it dies and it returns back to the earth. That's the way of the earth. That is the whole biological clock system that God has created, and it's beautiful. So he says to his son, I'm going, but be you strong and show yourself a man. We can also pray this and bless our sons with this. Be strong. Show yourself to be a man. Keep the charge of Yahuwah your Elohim. Beautiful blessing that you can bring over your son. Walk in his ways. Keep his statutes and his commandments and his judgments and his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses, so you may prosper, my son, in all that you do, and wherever you turn yourself. You can actually mark this for yourself if you have a child. This is a beautiful blessing you can give over your child. On a Sabbath evening, you could maybe, put your hands on your child's shoulders and rehearse these words. that King David rehearsed to his son. So King David says, when you keep the laws of God, you will show yourself to be a man, and you will be strong, and you will prosper in everything that you do. And he continues in verse 4, so that Yahuwah may continue his word, which he spoke concerning me, when he said, if your children take heed to their way, to walk before me in truth with all their heart and with all their soul, they shall never fail thee, a man on the throne of Israel. So there will always be a son of David on the throne of Israel. Unfortunately, God's promises is subject to conditions. His promises cannot just be thrown in front of his face whenever we want to demand something from him. So he said, if your sons, if your children will continue to love me and obey me, I will give them the rulership forever. But we know, not even 2 generations after David, everything fell apart. And Judah and Israel split up. The 10 tribes went one way and the 2 tribes stayed in the south. And then unfortunately, you had one king after the other. And that's what we're going to look at in this journey through the book of Kings, 1st and 2nd Kings. Bad king, bad king, bad king, good king. Bad, 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 good. Bad, good, good. Bad, 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 good. So, what an amazing couple of 100 years we are going to study together. The stupidity of these kings. Seeing the bad things that happened when their father ruled, if he was evil in the eyes of Yahuwah. And then the son becomes king and he does exactly the same or worse than his father. And then sometimes by miraculous intervention, you get a nice king and he breaks down all the pagan altars and idol temples and stuff, and he brings the people back to Yahuwah. And then the land prospers again, and the nation prospers, and there's field. The field is full of food, and the stalls are full of the cattle, and there's peace in the country, and everything goes well. And then the son, when he becomes king, he falls back into those evil cycles that his grandfather was in, although he could see very well how his father's reign was prosperous. So Yahuwah made this promise, but it's subject to conditions. The promise is there'll always be one of your children on the throne. And God's intention, of course, was never that Judah and Israel was supposed to be split. Although there's such a huge thing behind that, although it was never his intention, of course he allowed it to happen. Otherwise, me and you as Gentiles would never, ever in our lives had a chance to get to know this God. If Israel stayed one united nation, their 12 tribes, they never went out to evangelize. They never went out to speak to other nations. They never tried to bring people to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So if the 10 tribes didn't go into exile because of their adultery and idolatry, and if they weren't scattered into every tribe, nation, and tongue, we would never have had a chance to become part of Israel. Anyway, so God's intention is that the children of David must sit on the throne over the united Israel nation. In God's kingdom, there wasn't supposed to be 2 kings, one for Judah and one for Israel. God's promise includes that the descendants of David will rule over the entire 12 tribes. But of course, as we know, they didn't obey, and that's why the kingdom split, and that's why there were so many kings, and that's why it went so bad with them and us. So, while David is admonishing and giving very good advice to Solomon. He's also asking Solomon to revenge him in certain ways that David himself was never really able to, get to, what do you call it? Um, Closure, to get closure on certain aspects. So, verse 5, um, David says, "You know what Joab, the son of Zeruiah, did to me, and what he did to the two captains of the host of Israel, and what he did unto Abner, the son of Ner, and unto Amasa, the son of Jether." All right, so David is reminding Solomon about stuff that happened in the past. We discussed this whole historical event between Joab and Abner and Amasa. And if you can go back to the Bible studies we did on 2 Samuel chapter 2 and 2 Samuel chapter 3, you'll actually be reminded about this amazing young man that was following Abner, and then Abner killed him in the fifth rib. He put the spear under the fifth rib, and we saw the correlation with Yeshua that had a spear in his side. And then, of course, Joab killed Abner in the same way. We even laughed about it because we wondered if Joab also counted. Wait, Abner, I just want to count your ribs because I also want to get my spear exactly in your fifth rib. But there's quite something amazing that David says here. What Joab did was that he was shedding blood as if it was war, but he did that in a time of peace. And that is the problem that David had with Joab. Joab was an amazing man. He served David for many years, was very loyal until he wasn't, until he followed, what was his name? That other son of David. Oh, man. Can you believe it now? I forgot. Adoniah, wasn't it? Adoniah, until he became a turned tattle and he followed Adoniah. But David says, so Joab shed blood of war in peacetime, and he put the blood of war upon his girdle that was about his loins, and he put the blood of war on his shoes that were on his feet. So if we think about what does this represent, the girdle that's around your loins is something that, the men of the Bible always had around their loins. That's where you put your sword in. That's what keeps your clothes together. And it's called the belt of truth in the New Testament. And you put your sword in there, or your spear, or your any ammunition or tools that you have. So that is also something that helps you to go to war or to do your work or to be able to be handy, get stuff done, protect yourself. So during a time of peace, Joab was shedding the blood of war, and he shed it upon the girdle that was about his loins. Not only the belt, but the like the skirt that the belt was keeping up to cover his nakedness. So the blood came upon that, and that was supposed to be clean during a time of peace. You're not supposed to have blood on your girdle during a time of peace, and definitely not on your shoes, that's on your feet as well, because an innocent man's, well, not really innocent, we did discuss it in detail, but someone's blood was spilled that David didn't want to be killed. And because it was in a time of peace, it was a huge problem for David. For me, I think about the preparedness to witness about the gospel must be like shoes upon your feet in Ephesians 6, ne? And the girdle around your loins, of course, is the belt of truth. So when we stand with the shoes of preparedness for the gospel of Yeshua, when we stand in truth, then whether it's war or peace, Innocent blood is not supposed to come upon our clothes. And unfortunately, what David says to Solomon here in verse 6 is to do therefore according to your wisdom, and to not let his hoar head go down to the grave in peace. So this word hoar head was interesting to me. I looked it up, and it just means grey. He had a grey head because he was old. So David is telling Solomon, you are wise. There's so much that happened between me and Job, but now that I'm dying, I would like you to bring that revenge of blood in peacetime, to bring that revenge upon the head of Job, upon the grey head of Joab. And that's just typical of this life. Like David said, I'm going the way of all the earth. And God's natural cycles, biological, ecological, but also spiritual, is something that stands forever. It cannot be changed. You know, what you do to others will be done to you. You might think you can get away for a long time, but in Afrikaans we have a saying, wat jy saai sal jy maai. What you sow, you will reap. You know, the wheel turns. So in Job's case as well, now that David is dead, he might be thinking, nothing is ever going to happen to me because David never did anything to me. And the next moment, Solomon is going to not allow his grey head to go down into the grave in peace. So we'll have to see what Solomon does to Job. But then David says to Solomon, you need to show kindness unto the sons of Barzillai, the Gileadite, and let them be of those people that eats at your table. For so they came to me when I fled because of Absalom, your brother. So this, of course, we also discussed in beautiful detail in 2 Samuel chapter 19, where these people actually helped David so beautifully in the valley. Where was that valley now? Haniat or something like that. I can't remember now. But he was hiding away from Absalom, and then the Barzillai and his family was willing to help David. So David says, repay that kindness by showing kindness to the sons of this man that was willing to help me, and let them be guests, honored VIPs at your table. All right. And lastly, David says, behold, you have with you, Solomon, you have here in your midst, you've got Shimei, the son of Gera, a Benjamite of Bahurim, which cursed me with a grievous curse in the day when I met him when I went to Mahanaim. But he came down to meet me at Jordan and swore to him by the Lord, saying, I will not put you to death with the sword. So here you can also remember in 2 Samuel 16 and 19, we had this strange man. He was, remember, throwing stones at David and cursing him and saying, yeah, you caused Saul's death. No, you are cursed, when David was running away from Absalom. And, then David's men wanted to kill him, but eventually David set him free. And he said, him, as King David, have decided to show mercy because Shimei, of course, came back afterwards and he repented. And David decided to spare his life. But now it's time for reaping what you've sowed and for reaping your reward. So David says, now therefore hold him not guiltless, for you are a wise man, and you know what you ought to do unto him. But his hoar head, his grey head, bring you down to the grave with blood. So yeah, I know it sounds weird and bloodthirsty and revengeful, but we must try to think ourselves in those days. Even the Torah says an eye for an eye and a life for a life. And of course, we know that the Torah is very specific. There has to be witnesses, and there's place for justice and retribution. And of course, just on a side note, Yeshua never said disregard the Torah when he said, you heard it said eye for eye and life for life, but I say to you, you must rather just turn the other cheek. Because there's a difference between standing on your right and becoming a servant of Yeshua. And if you read in the Torah, if you become the servant of the master, then you cannot take revenge by your own or for yourself. No, no, no. You have to go to your master and you have to complain to your master what happened to you. And then your master will sort it out. Anyway, so there's place for retribution. And Shimei asked David to please spare my life, please spare my life. And David, couldn't help himself. He was gracious and he showed kindness to Shimei. Obviously, Shimei's life didn't change. He didn't become a good and faithful servant of David. So therefore, at the end of his life, David says, I think it's time that he gets what he deserves. So David slept with his fathers. All right, sleeping with the fathers, we know he dies because your body goes down into the grave and you are sleeping with your father that died before you, whose body is also in the grave, and there you'll sleep until the day of resurrection. And so he was buried in the city of David. So if you look at Acts 2:29 and Acts 13 verse 36, you'll see that David was still being buried or still buried in the city of David by the time that Yeshua was ascended back into heaven. And all the days that David reigned over Israel. So remember, this is now over Israel. In total, he reigned 40 years. We've been through the cycle of 40 so many times, especially in the book of Judges. Do you remember how the good, amazing Messianic picture judges always ruled for 40 years? Here, David, absolute Messianic picture, ruling for 40 years. 40 is a beautiful Messianic picture. Moses on the mountain, 40 years. Yeshua, 40 days. Yeshua in the wilderness, 40 days. So many things that happened with 40. But it's amazing for me, as we discussed also when we looked at Samuel, that for 7 years, David reigned in Hebron, meaning he reigned over Judah, the house of Judah, the two tribes of Judah and Benjamin, called the Jews. During that 7 years, remember, there was this war between Judah and Israel, between David and Absalom. And David was anointed king over Judah. But it took 7 years, and 7 is a huge kingdom number. Everything is about 7. The 7 days of the week, the 7 feast days, the sevenfold menorah. There's a million things about 7. But it took 7 years until David got to the point where the 10 tribes also accepted him and where they also anointed him to be king over them. So 7 years over Judah and 33 years he reigned in Jerusalem. So in Hebron, he reigned for 7 years only over the tribes of Judah. But then when he was finally allowed to come into Jerusalem, that was another 33 years. 33, very interesting. They say Yeshua was 33 when he was, when he was called the King of the Jews, when he was hanging on the execution stake. And of course, we know the whole occult system has stolen this 33. And now they've got the 33 degrees of Freemasonry. So there's a huge thing about 33. It's also, of course, a third of 100. And if you look at, now I don't want to go into too much detail. There's a million things. We're going to start on a rabbit trail here. So 7 years plus 33 then gives you 40. And both 47 and 33 has got massive prophetic implication. So it's time to say goodbye. David, you've taught us so much. I'm not speaking to a dead man. I'm speaking to the to the David in the Bible. I'm not a necromancer. I'm just, what's the word? Symbolically speaking to David that I see here in my Bible. David, you have allowed us into your life. You've allowed us into your heart, into your mind, so that we can see and understand how you feel when you were afraid, when you were running away, when you were betrayed by your very own family, your very own sons. You allowed us to see through your eyes what God Himself, the Father, and the Messiah is like. You've allowed us a peek into your emotions when we read the book of Psalms, and we reminded you've written this psalm as your son was dying. Psalm, what is it now? I think it's Psalm 53. Let me just make sure. You wrote Psalm 51 when your son, that you had your first son with Bathsheba, when he was dying. You taught us so much about the things you did right and the things you did wrong, the things that you did that was surprising, the things you did that was predictable, the things you did that showed us examples of our own lives, and the way in which you clung to Yahuwah, the way in which you was willing to give up everything and be a stranger. Sometimes you even had to pretend that you were crazy, and you had to even uh, do so much to survive. And all the time you were anointed as king by Samuel, but you were willing to go through all that because you were waiting for the appointed times of Yahuwah to come to fruition. Thank you, David. We have learned a hell of a lot from you. We say goodbye to you today. And we are confirming what the Bible says. May the name of Solomon be even greater than yours, King David. We love you, King David. We admire you. We respect you. We honor you. And we definitely cannot wait to meet you one day. But if we've learned much from you, if the Bible is true, and Solomon's name is going to be even greater than yours, King David, we cannot imagine what's lying ahead for us in learning from Solomon. So, David, today we tip our hats to you and we say, Shalom, Melech David.